All right, this is chapter 4 on tissues. So we have our learning objectives as we always do. Again, you'll want to go back and take a look at these at the end of the lecture and make sure that you can answer all of these. So let's start with talking about what a tissue is. A tissue is a group of cells that work together. So you have a whole bunch of them that work together. So we've been talking about cells in the last chapter. When we take different groups of cells and put them together, we call that a tissue. So there's more than 200 types of cells in the body, but there's only 4 types of tissues. So the cells are going to, within a tissue, share a common embryonic origin. Histology is the study of tissues. So this is using the microscope, learning about the appearance and the organization, the function, being able to identify them. So that's what a histologist does. There are 4 types of basic cell tissue, or basic tissue types. We have epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. And the picture there gives you some examples of the different ones that we'll be talking about. We'll start our conversation with talking about epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is large sheets of cells that are covering all of the surfaces of the body that are exposed to the outside world and lining the outside of our organs. There are 2 main forms. They're the ones that are covering and lining epithelia, which is what we find on the outside of you, like your skin, and the internal surfaces, like lining the inside of your mouth. And then there's glandular epithelia. These are secretory tissues that are that make glands, and we have endocrine and exocrine glands. We'll be talking about those. A salivary gland, a sweat gland, all those kinds of ones are examples. Main functions of epithelial tissue, unless it's a simple tissue, it is considered protection, absorption, filtration, excretion, secretion, and sensory reception. So what does the epithelial tissue do? It provides the body's first line of protection. It keeps the outside out and the inside in. It protects you from physical, chemical, and biological wear and tear. The cells of an epithelium act as a gatekeeper of the body, controlling the permeability and allowing selective transfer of materials across a physical barrier. And many epithelial cells are capable of secretion and release mucus and other specific chemical compounds onto their apical surfaces. Some characteristics. So how do we know what puts it into this group called epithelial tissue? 4 distinguishing characteristics. Epithelial cells have what's called polarity, meaning that when we look at the cell, the 2 ends of the cell, the part that's facing into the body and the part that's facing outside of the body, they're different from each other. They're not the same. So that's what they're explaining there in that first point. The second one is that they are supported by connective tissue and separated from them by what's called the basal lamina. So you'll have your epithelial tissue, then you'll have this little skinny line called the basal lamina, which is a mixture of glycoproteins and collagen. That's attached to a basement membrane, and then that is the connective tissues under that. The basement membrane is actually made by the connective tissue. So epithelial tissues are completely avascular, so they do not have a blood supply. They get all of their nutrients and pass their waste and all of that through diffusion or by absorption from underlying tissues or from the surface. And epithelial tissues are typically capable of regeneration. So most of them have the ability to go through the process of mitosis to replace damaged or dead cells. When we look at epithelial tissue, it is a sheet of tissue. So what's holding all of those individual cells together? They're not separated by any type of intracellular material. So the cells have to be connected to each other. And there's 3 different main ways that the cells are connected to each other. One is called a tight junction, another is called a desmosome, and the final is called a gap junction. So tight junctions, this is what separates the cells into the apical and the basal compartments, the top and the bottom. When we have 2 adjacent epithelial cells, they form a tight junction, and there is no extracellular space between them and the movement of substances through the extracellular space between them. So nothing can get in between them. This enables this epithelial tissue to act as a selective barrier. So it's almost like welding the cell together in those spots. Desmosomes are more like a little piece of Velcro that's holding the two sides together. These occur in patches on the membranes of the cells. The patches are structural proteins on the inner surface of the cell membrane. They provide strength, but they also provide flexibility. So if you've ever played with Velcro a little bit, you know that it's a little bit wiggly. You can move it just a little tiny bit, and that's what these cells, these desmosomes allow the cells to do. The junctions influence the shape and the folding of the epithelial tissue. And then finally, we have gap junctions. These are an intercellular passageway between the membranes of adjacent cells to facilitate the movement of fluid and small molecules and ions between the cytoplasm into cells. These junctions also allow electrical and metabolic coupling of the adjacent cells, which allows them to work as one large group of cells. I think of gap junctions like when you go to the drive-through at the bank and you have to put your money in and your deposit slip or whatever it is you're doing in the little tube, and then you shoot the tube over to the banker, and the banker does whatever they have to do. The teller has to do whatever they have to do, and then they send it back to you. That's kind of how gap junctions work. So if you look at them on the picture, there's those green structures, and they're able to send messages and signals and things like that back and forth. When we classify our epithelia, it's pretty simple. It comes in two versions. So the first thing that we look at are how many layers do you have of cells. If you only have a single layer of cells, it's referred to as being simple. If you have more than one cell, it's referred to as being stratified. So that's the first thing that we look at with our epithelial tissue is how many layers of cells do we have. Then we look at the shape. That's the second thing that we look at. And there's three basic shapes, and then there's some variations within those. So squamous means a flat and thin. So you can see that over in the picture. They're nice and flat. Cuboidal means a box-shaped cell or a square. So it's as wide as it is tall. So you can see that in the second row there. And then columnar are rectangular or columnar rectangular shaped cells. Columns was the word I was looking for there. And so you can see those in the third one. So how do we describe a tissue? We simply put those two things together. We put how many layers we have, simple or stratified, and then the shape. So that's how we're always going to name these. So for example, if we had a single layer of flat cells, we would refer to that as simple squamous epithelium. And you do have to add the word epithelium at the end because we're going to talk about 4 different types of tissue. And I need to know that you know that the simple squamous is epithelium and not muscle tissue. Let's try another one. Let's say you have multiple layers of cube-shaped cells. What do you think you would call that? Stratified cuboidal epithelium. Excuse me. What if you had a single layer of rectangular shaped cells? Simple columnar. Okay? All right, let's go through these tissues and let's talk about some things. So you're going to want to know a description of the tissue, and you're going to want to know its function, and you're going to want to know where you would find it. So this is a really great place to do some flashcards. So our first one we're going to talk about is simple epithelial tissue. This is a single layer of flattened cells. They look like thin scales. Where would I find this? The alveoli of the lungs, that's where the gas exchange happens. The segments of our kidney tubules and the lining of capillaries. All of those are places you would find simple squamous epithelial tissue. Any place you want to have diffusion occur. So diffusion that we've already learned about only happens over really short distances, and if it has to go through a membrane, that membrane has to be really thin. And so this cell membrane is really, really thin on simple epithelial tissue, so we can pass things through diffusion back and forth. Simple epithelia is one of its function is not protection. It is not capable of protecting the tissue underneath because it's just a single layer of cells. I want you to think about this for a second. the lining on the inside of your mouth. The lining on the inside of your mouth is stratified epithelial tissue because you have multiple layers there, and it protects the tissue that's underneath of that. If you've ever eaten anything that's really abrasive, I always think of Captain Crunch. So I don't know whether you guys eat Captain Crunch cereal before, but it's really, really rough. And when you eat it, the next day, later in the day, your whole inside of your mouth feels like it's torn up. Can you imagine if you only had a single layer of cells? You would be bleeding from eating your Captain Crunch cereal. So simple epithelial tissue has nothing to do with protection, but everything to do with diffusion. Simple cuboidal epithelium is a single layer of cube-shaped cells. The nucleus of the box-like cells appears round, and it's usually right near the middle of the cell. And you can see that with each one of those purple dots. Each one of those purple dots, and there's one cuboidal cell that is outlined in blue. If you can find that on there, notice that it's roughly box-like shaped, and the center of it is where we would find the nucleus. These epithelial cells are active in the secretion and absorption of molecules. Simple cuboidal epithelia are observed in the lining of the kidney tubules, the ducts of glands, places like that. So what we're looking at in this picture is a cross section. A cross section. It's like think of you have a whole handful of straws, and look down the tube in the middle of them. Down the very middle of that tube, the part where the soda would go if you were using it as a straw or tea or whatever you're drinking. That's called the lumen. Think about a garden hose. The part where the water comes out is called the lumen. All right. And those cells are lining that lumen. Simple columnar epithelium. This is a single layer of rectangular cells. The nucleus of the tall column-like cells tends to be elongated and located near the basal end of the cells. This type of tissue is active in absorption and secretion in the of molecules. Simple columnar epithelium forms the linings of some sections of our digestive tract, as well as part of our female reproductive tract. It can have cellular extensions to aid in its functions. So let's move to the stratified tissues now. Stratified squamous epithelium. This consists of several layers of cells stacked on top of one another. The epithelium protects against physical and chemical wear and tear, which is what I was talking about with the Captain Crunch. The most common type of stratified epithelium in the human body is squamous. Your skin, your tongue, the lining of your mouth, all kinds of places like that where you would have a lot of abrasion happening. Stratified squamous comes in two versions. The top version is called non-keratinized. When you look at that tissue, you can see the nucleus. So just look at the darker purple colored tissue, that whole layer, all that layer right there from the squiggly line going on up. That's all simple or a stratified squamous. And look how many layers of cells that you have. All right. Notice that you can see a nucleus all the way up to the top. This is going to be tissue that you find inside of the body. Okay. The bottom picture is actually skin. And again, I want you to go to the squiggly line at the bottom. Okay. And so where the light pink and the kind of darker pinkish purple meet, everything from that darkish pink and purple right there, that border all the way up to the top. So the majority of that slide, that is all stratified squamous. But notice in the very top area, you have a kind of an orangey pink color right there. Notice that you don't see any nuclei. In skin, that very top layer of the epidermis is dead and is no longer doesn't have a nucleus anymore. All right, and so you'll see the difference between those two. So that one will be called keratinized. So when that cell dies, it fills up with keratin, and keratin is a protein that kind of waterproofs you, not completely, but it kind of waterproofs you on the outside of your body. Stratified cuboidal and columnar epithelium. These exist in the human body, but they're only in certain glands and ducts, and they're pretty uncommon. So we don't really study them much in this course, just know that they exist. Here's what they look like. On the left-hand side, you see stratified cuboidal. Notice that you've got two rows of cube-shaped cells with no basement membrane or anything in between them. And so that would be stratified cuboidal. And then over on the right-hand side, you have stratified columnar. you can see two different nuclei, two different levels of nuclei, and that tells you you've got stratified columnar. Again, they're pretty rare in the human body. They're more rare in they're more common in other animals. And then you have this oddball called pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And so this is a type of epithelium that appears to be stratified, but in reality, it's actually just a single layer of irregularly shaped and differently sized columnar cells. Pseudo means false. All right, so we have a false, what looks like a multiple layer, but it's really not. So a false stratified layer. The nuclei of the neighboring cells appear at different levels rather than clustered at the basal end like we saw in the regular simple columnar. The arrangement gives the appearance of stratification, but in fact, all of the cells are in contact with the basal lamina, which is where it attaches to at the base end, and some of them don't even make it to the apical surface. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium is found in the respiratory tract, where some of the cells have cilia, and if that's the case, then it's called pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Best way I can describe this tissue is if you took a piece of elastic and you stretched out that piece of elastic and then you glued sequins onto it, one right after another, right on the elastic, and then you let it go back to its regular size. All of the sequins would bunch up. So when you stretched it out, you'd see that all of the sequins were attached to the elastic, but when we let it go scrunch up, you couldn't see that anymore. And there's what you see there. Over on the left-hand side is a drawing of it, and over on the right-hand side, you can see an actual micrograph. So pseudostratified, both of those have cilia. The cilia are the fuzzy hair-like things, so pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Not all pseudostratified has cilia, but a lot of it does. And then the last of the epithelial tissues we want to know about is transitional epithelium. It is found only in the urinary system, especially in the ureters, but primarily in the urinary bladder. When the bladder is empty, because this is lining the bladder, the epithelial tissue looks like cuboidal cells. But as the bladder fills up, those apical cells, the ones closest to the inside of the bladder, they're flattened by the pressure of the urine and they look squamous. And so it just depends on whether the bladder is full or not. Now, when we're looking at a micrograph, the micrograph is a piece of tissue that's no longer intact. It's no longer in there. So it's always going to look like it has these kind of rounded top edges. So if you can see these, the very apical edge, the top edge of this tissue right here, what you'll notice is it has kind of like a dome to it. And you can see that in the drawing as well. Let's talk a little bit about glandular epithelia. So a gland is a structure made of one or more cells modified to synthesize and secrete chemical substances. A gland can be classified one of two ways. It can either be an endocrine gland, which is a ductless gland, duct meaning it doesn't have a tube, not quack quack duck, that doesn't have a tube that releases its secretions directly into the surrounding tissues. So it does not have a tube that carries its product to the surface of something. It just releases it into mostly the blood and the lymph in the tissues around it. An exocrine gland is the one that has secretions that leave through a duct, and that duct either goes directly or indirectly to the external environment. So a little bit more about endocrine glands. The secretion of endocrine glands are called hormones. So this is the first topic that we cover in the second half of this course. Hormones are released into the interstitial fluid. They diffuse over into the bloodstream, and then they're delivered to their targets. In other words, they have receptors that are going to bind those hormones. And so you can see that in the picture right there. A few examples of your endocrine glands include things like the anterior pituitary, the thymus, the adrenal glands, the gonads, the pancreas. It goes on and on. Exocrine glands, on the other hand, are going to make their product and then they're going to send that product up to a tube and it's going to be excreted out to the surface. All right, so mucus, sweat, saliva, breast milk, these are all examples of secretions from exocrine glands. So that's our first tissue. All right, so everything we looked at just now all has the word epithelial tissue associated with it. Okay, now we're going to move to the second group, and that's going to be connective tissues. And so this is a huge, what looks like a really disorganized mess of tissue, things that you think, how in the world could these all be connective tissues, but they are, all right, because they all have three common characteristics. They all have cells. They all have a large amount of amorphous ground substance called the matrix, and they all have fibers. So the amount and structure of each of those three components I was talking about is going to correlate with the function of the tissue, from the rigid ground substance that we find in bones that support the body to the only fluid connection tissue in the body, blood. So lots of things, a lot of variation in this group. What is the function of connective tissues? Well, its name kind of tells you it connects. It supports and connects other tissues, but the protection component of it, things like bone, protect your skull, protect your brain with the skull. Specialized cells in connective tissue defend the body from microorganisms that enter into the body. They transport fluids, nutrients, waste, and chemical messengers. That's done by the fluid connective tissues, blood and lymph. Adipose cells are going to store the surplus energy that you consume in the form of fat, and they're going to contribute to our thermal insulation of the body. So they are all about supporting and connecting other tissues. Connective tissue cells are going to be dispersed through an area called the matrix. The matrix is non-living. So it usually includes a large amount of extracellular material that's produced by the connective tissue cells that are embedded in it. So they make this kind of, I call it the background that it's all in. The major component of the matrix is a ground substance. These are often crisscrossed protein fibers. This ground substance is usually fluid, but it can be mineralized and become solid like we see in bone. So let's just look at some connective tissue examples here. This is what all we're going to be looking at. So we're going to be looking at loose connective tissue, and in that category we have three to look at: areolar, adipose, and reticular. We're going to be looking at dense connective tissue, and that's going to include regular elastic, irregular elastic. We're going to look at some supportive connective tissues that include the three types of cartilage: hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic. We're going to look at bone, which is compact and cancellous bone, and then we're going to look at the fluid connective tissues that include blood and lymph. So looking at these connective tissues proper, the cells that we're going to find include fibroblasts. These are the most abundant type of cell that you'll find in connective tissue proper. It is responsible for making that extracellular matrix that I mentioned. Adipocytes are cells that store lipids as droplets, and they fill up most of the cytoplasm. Mesenchymal cells is another type of cell that you'll see in connective tissue. This is a multipotent adult stem cell, sometimes called pluripotent is another term for that. These cells can differentiate into any type of connective tissue cells needed for repair and healing of damaged tissues. There's three main types of fibers that we find in our connective tissue proper. They're all secreted by fibroblasts. Anytime you see the word blast at the end of a sentence or of a word, it means the immature version. The immature version. So fibroblasts are the immature version that make these different kinds of fibers, including collagen, elastic, and reticular fibers. So some details about that. Collagen fibers are flexible with great tensile strength. They resist stretching, and they give ligaments and tendons their characteristic resilience and strength. Elastic fibers are made of the protein called elastin, along with lesser amounts of other proteins and some glycoproteins. And their main property is that they are able to stretch and compress and then recoil. So elastic, think about like a rubber band, an elastic band. Elastic fibers are prominent in elastic tissues found in the skin and the elastic ligaments of the vertebral column. So any place where you want for the tissue to bounce back. Reticular fiber is also formed from the same protein subunits as collagen fibers, but these are narrow and arranged in a branching network. So more the term reticular means net. They're found throughout the body, but they're more abundant in places where we have soft organs like the liver and the spleen. So taking a look at some of these, let's look at the drawing because it's a lot easier to look at right now. So you see the big gray fibers, those big gray fibers, those are collagen. All right. And then I want you to look for the little skinny gray fibers, and those are the elastic fibers. And then you have the blue ones, kind of a navy blue one, and they look kind of like a net. Those are the reticular fibers. So those are the three fibers that you have. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at with these connective tissues is the organization of those fibers. That's going to tell us a lot about what that particular tissue does. You can also see in here some adipocytes. You can see some mesenchymal cells, fibroblast, a macrophage, but what we're really focusing on here are the fibers in this picture. So let's go through these different connective tissues that we need to know about. We'll start with areolar loose connective tissue. This shows very little specialization. It contains all of the cell types and fibers previously described and distributed in a random web-like fashion. So I want you to look at the micrograph, right? That's kind of a mess. Everything's kind of just going every which way. You see the little skinny fibers, the blue ones, those are the elastic fibers. You see the thicker, pale, pink ones, those are the collagen fibers. You see cells, but what you don't see is any organization of the fibers, and that's what tells you it's areolar connective tissue. This is the packing peanuts of your body. It's what fills in the spaces around muscle fibers, surrounds your blood vessels, your lymph vessels. It supports the organs. Ignore the cat meowing in the background. For those of you that don't know, I live out on a farm, so you're likely to hear cats and dogs and roosters and goats, and I have a donkey, so just ignore all of the background animal noise. So anyway, areolar tissue underlies most of our epithelial tissue. It represents the connective tissue component of the epithelial membranes, which is described in a later section. So this is areolar loose connective tissue. And when you identified it, you would want to identify it just exactly using those words. If all you say is areolar, I don't know if you know it's connective tissue. I don't know if you think it's epithelial tissue or muscle tissue. So when you describe that tissue, you would want to say areolar loose connective. You can leave off the word tissue because I know it's a tissue. Adipose loose connective. Adipose is all about fat storage. And you don't have a lot of extracellular matrix. So what you're looking at here, you see that yellow bubble in the drawing and the clear bubble in the picture. That's the fat. Fat does not pick up the dye, the stain that we use. And so it looks clear. And so it fills up the whole inside. And so what's really different about these, if you look at the picture on the right, the micrograph, when you're looking at the cell membrane, which is the skinny little pink line around each one of those, every once in a while you see like a darker spot. That's the nucleus of that cell. That fat has filled up that cell and has pushed all of the organelles and the nucleus over to the side. And so adipocytes are unique in that they have a characteristic that no other cell has. Most of the cells in the body are constrained in size by what's called surface to volume ratio. So the inside of the cell cannot get too large that the outside, the cell membrane cannot take care of it. So cells stay really, really small for that reason. Adipocytes, because their nucleus is all the way over to the side, they don't have that size constraint. So they can just get as big as possible, right? And so that is what happens when you gain weight. When you gain weight, you fill up those cells right there. And when you lose weight, you empty out those cells. That's fat in there that your body can use as energy. So when you go on a diet and you exercise, you burn the fat in those cells. Our last type of loose connective tissue that we look at is called reticular. It is a mesh-like supportive framework for soft organs like the lymphatic tissue, the spleen, and the liver. It's a very wiggly jiggly type of tissue. It's not firm at all. Reticular cells produce the reticular fibers that form the network onto which these cells attach. And so you can see what it looks like. It's not the greatest picture of it. It kind of looks like, if you look at it long enough and you look at a lighter picture of it, you see the reticular fibers, which are really dark, dark, dark. And then it looks like all of these little purple cells all around it. Those are to me, it looks like grapes on a grape stem. Grapes on a stem, like, grapes you see at the grocery store, the purple ones. That's what that looks like to me. So we were looking at loose connective tissues. Now we're going to change and look at dense connective tissues. So what we're going to see here is a lot more organization of the fibers. more collagen, and they're going to be much more organized. This is going to allow a greater resistance to stretching. When we look at that areolar connective tissue, if you stretch that stuff, it's just going to tear apart. Nothing's going any particular direction. But these guys are going to have their collagen and elastin fibers much more organized. There's three varieties that we're going to talk about: dense regular, dense irregular, and dense regular elastic. So dense regular, if you take a look at the micrograph on the far right-hand side, you see all those pink lines, lots and lots and lots of pink squiggly lines going across. All of those are collagen fibers. And what you see squeezed in between are the fibroblast nuclei, the little purple there. That's the little nuclei for the fibroblasts that are there. But you see how organized they are, right? And they're real densely packed. So all of the cells are parallel to each other, and this enhances the tensile strength and resistance to stretching in the direction of the fiber orientation. Ligaments and tendons are made of dense regular connective tissue. Ligaments, but in the ligaments, they are not all the fibers are not exactly parallel. Dense irregular connective tissue, the direction of the fibers is somewhat random. It's not as organized. This one to me always looks like ground beef if you look at the micrograph on the right-hand side. The arrangement gives the tissues greater strength in all directions and less strength in one particular direction. So things like the dermis, which is a layer under the epidermis in your skin, and fibrous joint capsules. The classic example to look at is the shoulder. So the shoulder has tendons and ligaments that hold it all in place, but there's a fibrous joint capsule around it as well, and it's made of this tissue, which is why you can do a 360-degree movement with your shoulder, because you have that less organization of the fibers. It gives it a lot of strength and holds it all in place, thank goodness, or your shoulder would be falling out all the time. But it's not quite as strong as what we see with dense regular. And then finally, we have elastic connective tissue. This one people argue about. Some people say it's dense regular. Some people say it's dense irregular. It doesn't matter. I just call it elastic connective tissue. In this one, we have all of our collagen fibers, but we also have elastic fibers. So if you remember from our conversation at the beginning of this, elastic fibers are going to give it more stretch and recoil. That's the big thing, the recoil there. So it allows the tissue to return to its original length after stretching. So places where we want the tissue to recoil back down, like the wall of the aorta, would be a good example of where we would see elastic connective tissue. All right, still in connective tissues, but another category. This is called cartilage connective tissue. So this is going to be made out of polysaccharides called chondroitin sulfates. These are embedded within a matrix, and the cells are called the chondrocytes. The space around them is called a lacunae, and I'll point this out in a slide coming up. Cartilaginous tissue is avascular. It needs its nutrients to be diffused through the matrix to reach to the chondrocytes. This is why it is really slow to heal cartilaginous tissues. So if you've ever known anyone that's had an injury to the meniscus of their knee or anything like that, and how long it took for that to heal, cartilaginous tissues, they take a very long time if they heal at all. There's three different types: hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. So let's look at hyaline cartilage connective tissue first. This is the most common type of cartilage in the body. It is short and dispersed collagen fibers and large amounts of proteoglycans. It's strong and flexible. It's found in the rib cage. It covers the bones. Lots and lots of places where you'll find at joints where you'll find cartilage tissue. So looking at our picture, looking at the micrograph over on the far right-hand side, cartilage cells, chondrocytes, typically come in pairs. And to me, they look like a pair of eyeballs, right? But you see the cell, it's little pink dot with the white around it. The little pink dot you see in the middle there, that's the actual cell itself. The area, the space that you see around it, it's called the lacunae. So what you've got are chondrocytes that are sitting in this little space. It's like it's sitting in its own little jacuzzi in there all by itself. Elastic cartilage connective tissue has elastic fibers and collagen and proteoglycans, and this tissue gives rigid support as well as elasticity. The external ear contains elastic cartilage. I want to remind you that cartilage is very, very slow to heal if it ever heals. So when you do damage to your ear, it most likely will not heal. right? It'll always be scarred and probably have a notch in it. So when you see people who have had multiple piercings in their ears, and especially ones where they've made those piercings very large, that's never going to go back. That's never going to go back because it just takes forever to heal. So when you take a look at the far right-hand side, the elastic cartilage, you see your chondrocytes, right? You see those in there, and they're in their little lacunae. And then you see all that dark pink that's between them. That dark pink that's between them, that's the elastic fibers. And notice that it's going lots of different directions because when elastic fiber allows for all of the recoil to happen. Fibrocartilage connective tissue. This is the toughest of all of the connective tissue, or the cartilage connective tissues that we talk about. It has thick bundles of collagen fibers that are running all parallel to one another typically. The meniscus of the knee and the discs between your vertebral bones are examples of where you would find fibrocartilage, and you can see that in the picture. You can see the lacunae with the little chondrocyte sitting inside of it, and then you see all of the collagen fibers that are running parallel to one another, and they're all nice and organized, all going the same direction. Bone, also known as osseous connective tissue. Bone is perfectly fine to say. Osseous is harder to spell. This is the hardest connective tissue that we have. It provides protection to the internal organs and supports the body. And so this is not the greatest picture that's in the slide set that they gave us to use, but you can see the bone cell in the very middle. It's the dark dot right there. That's not the bone cell. That's actually the central canal running down the middle. The bone cells are those little black dots surrounding all the way around that one. Okay, and so each one of those circles is a cylinder of bone. This is a cross section that we're looking at. That part that's going down the middle, the central canal, that's where the blood supply goes. And nerves. All right, let's look at blood and lymph connective tissue. This is still in the connective tissue category. These are the fluid connective tissues. So the cells are going to circulate in the liquid, non-living extracellular matrix that we call the plasma. So your plasma is the matrix portion of this connective tissue. It's going to transport nutrients and salts and waste throughout the body. Lymph is going to drain into the blood vessels. It's going to deliver the molecules to the blood that could otherwise they couldn't get directly into the bloodstream. So taking a look at this picture over on the right, the pale pink discs that you see are all the erythrocytes or red blood cells. You see one great big white blood cell, the lymphocyte there, and all of the kind of whitish gray stuff in the background, all of that, that's represented, that's your plasma. So that takes us out of connective tissues. And now we're going into the third main category. All right. And that's going to be muscle. So everything in this category is going to have the word muscle at the end of it. And there's only three that we're going to have to look at. So this is not so bad. Connective tissue is the biggest one. So muscle tissue is characterized by properties that allow for movements. So muscle cells are excitable. They respond to stimulus. They respond to electrical stimulus. They are contractile, meaning they can shorten. And when they do that, they cause a pulling force. So muscles are oriented in your body so that they're attached to one bone. They span a joint, and then they're going to be attached to the bone below that. When we're talking about our limbs. And when that muscle shortens, it causes movement at the joint. There's three types of muscle tissue that we're going to examine here. We're going to look at skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. So here is a little table for you to look at, and it gives you the histology, what they look like, what the function of them is, and where we would find them. So you can refer back to this to make sure you got everything. Skeletal muscle is attached to our bones, and when it contracts, it causes voluntary movement of the body. So sometimes they call it voluntary muscle. The muscles appear striated or striped with lots of nuclei. This is the multinucleated tissue I was talking about, or one of the multinucleated tissues I was talking about back in chapter 3. And so you can see that if you enlarge the picture, you can see that it has a striped appearance to it. And you can see each one of those pink streaks that you see is an actual muscle cell, a myocyte. And you can see the nuclei are the dark purple, and they're over to the periphery of each one of those strip cells of tissue. Cardiac muscle is what forms the walls of your heart. It is involuntary because you're not controlling the movement of that consciously. It appears striated, however, if we look at it underneath of the microscope. It has the stripes as well. The cells generally only have one nucleus, and the cells contain a specialized cell junction so that they're connecting with one another and communicating with one another, called the intercalated discs. And then finally, smooth muscle. So smooth muscle is for involuntary movement in our internal organs. It forms a contractile component of the digestive, urinary, and reproductive systems, as well as the airways and our arteries. Each cell is spindle-shaped, meaning that it is skinny and tapered on the ends, with a single nucleus and no visible striations. That leads us to the last category of tissue, and there's only one slide to look at for this, so I know you have to be happy about that. Nervous tissue is our last big category that we talk about. This tissue is characterized as being excitable and capable of sending and receiving electrochemical signals that are going to provide the body with information. So this is what we spend the last couple of weeks of the semester looking at, because nervous system it's huge. It's really, really important. There's two main classes of cells that we'll be talking about: the neuron, which is what you see with that yellow thing right there, and the neuroglia, which are the support cells that we'll be talking about when we get to nervous system. So this one's always pretty easy to identify when you look at the slide. The cell kind of looks like a kite. If you look at the slide picture up there, the neuronal cells. And then we need to review membranes real quick. All right. The membranes are composed of epithelial tissue attached to a layer of connective tissue. And there's three different ways to be a membrane. You can be a cutaneous membrane, a mucous membrane, or a serous membrane. And we've already talked about serous membrane, so you really only have to learn about two of these. So the cutaneous membrane, that's a big fancy name for your skin. It's an epithelial membrane, and we can refer to it as the cutaneous membrane. It's stratified squamous epithelial tissue resting on top of connective tissue. The apical surface of this membrane is exposed to the outside world and is covered with dead keratinized cells that help prevent the body from drying out and help to prevent pathogens from getting in. Mucous membrane is a composite of connective and epithelial tissue. It's going to line the body cavities and hollow passageways that open to the outside world. This is going to include the digestive, respiratory, excretory, and reproductive tracts. And finally, the one that you already know about, serous membranes. This is epithelial membrane that's composed of epithelial cells supported by connective tissue that we talked about in chapter 1 at the very end. These membranes line the cavities that do not open to the outside world and are covering. It also covers the organs that are located within those cavities. It's identified according to its location with a two-word term that includes visceral or parietal and then the name of the cavity. So, for example, the visceral pericardium or the parietal peritoneum. So we talked about all of those. All right. I know this was kind of fast, but I wanted to get this one completed so it wouldn't take so long for you to get through it. So make sure that you have done all the work associated with this and listen to the lecture. Make sure you go back and look at the objectives. And I will see you for chapter 5, where we're going to actually talk about our first system.